This lecture covers what you'll need to know about delivering the informative speech in this class and other classes like it. An informative speech could have one or many objectives, but these are some of the more general objectives that you will see in an informative speech assignment. The first one is the most plain and simple, and that is to communicate knowledge. Another would be to raise awareness about a subject, or if the awareness is already there, the next one is to provide additional information to the audience beyond their current knowledge base. Another thing is to demonstrate how something works. This would be in the form of something like a how-to speech. Or maybe you are there to describe an event or a phenomenon. Or you're there to shape perceptions. The last one there is a bit tricky. Shaping perceptions means to change someone's view of reality, to target their beliefs and try to change those. If that is your goal, to change perceptions, you are likely to have a persuasive tone to your speech. And persuasion is something different than an informative speech, so you need to be careful about that. One of the more difficult things that a lot of people struggle with is just settling on a topic. Now, in classes like this, oftentimes a topic will be picked for you, or you can choose from a range of topics provided, or a list of topics provided. So there's situations where it's easier, but sometimes it's just all you, and that can be very difficult. So you try to be creative because you don't want to just cover something that everyone else has already talked about. One method of choosing topics is called brainstorming. Brainstorming is a problem-solving technique that involves the spontaneous generation of ideas through one of several different options that we're going to look at, different methods. The first one is called word association. Word association is where you write down a word that relates to something you might want to discuss. As you can see there's a list. Next, you write down any word or any group of words that you consider to be related to your first word. And this is a messy process. It just kind of ends up being a word cloud written down on a piece of paper, a whole bunch of ideas just kind of scattered all across a page. From there, you just start narrowing them down, seeing what applies to what, and you might end up with main points or even supporting points through this process. Next one's called topic mapping, and topic mapping is very similar to word association, except it's a bit more clean and neat. So as you can see here, and this is just an image I pulled from Google somewhere, you start out with a word here in the middle, and then you think of words that are associated with that first word. And then you think of words associated with that second word that still fall into the category of the first. And you end up with, by this little model here, 4 different directions that you could go with a single speech topic. And you end up with some supporting evidence, or at least supporting points through this technique. So it's something that could be useful for you if you're struggling on organization. Just to give you a quick look at how this can work quickly, let's say that of all the topics you could pick to speak about in an informative speech, you decided to speak about football. Well, there's a lot of different options that we can see here, different facets to football, even down to what the rest of the world calls football. Be way too much to cover in a single short speech, so you have to narrow it down. So our general topic is college football. We've narrowed it down to just college. That's still pretty broad. So now we want to narrow it down even further to one facet inside of college football. The general purpose of the speech is to inform. Your specific purpose here then is to inform the audience about the intricate processes of the NFL draft. So you go very quickly from the word football to this specific purpose. And that's the beauty of brainstorming, is that it is quick and fairly painless. Now that specific purpose term right there, that is something that you do not share with the audience. It is only something that you have for yourself. This is my purpose. This is something written for me as the speaker. I don't read it to the audience. Now, this is fairly innocuous right here, but in persuasive speaking, the specific purpose is more direct as to what you plan to accomplish. And that's not the way we typically begin a speech in persuasion. What you will share with the audience is the thesis statement. The thesis statement is the central idea or theme of the speech stated in the form of a single declarative sentence. It concisely expresses what the speech will be about and how you will support it from your point of view. I refer to this often as the backbone of the speech. Without a clear thesis statement, the organization of the speech just won't be there, and your audience won't know what the speech is about. You really need a solid backbone and a very clear thesis statement for your speech to be effective. Something that's really good to get in the habit of during a speech is defining your terminology, especially when you're talking about something technical or something that would be unfamiliar to the audience. So you can define your terms by illustrating the root or historical meanings of the term. If it's a word that's kind of archaic or just not used very often, sometimes we go to old meanings of a term or where the word came from. Sometimes we explain what something is by what it does. Sometimes we describe what something is by defining what it is not. So if a word is oftentimes used incorrectly, first we clear up this is not what the word means, and then we turn around and define what it actually means. Sometimes we define a term by providing concrete examples, meaning we give examples of things that people have seen, something that's going to be very clear for them. And then lastly here, we sometimes define something by comparing it to something that it is like, something similar. We do this through metaphor or simile or analogy quite often. Continuing on with the idea of definition, you want to make sure you define jargon or difficult concepts that relate to your topic very clearly. Jargon are technical terms. So they're words that are specific to a field of expertise. So you can use them as long as you clearly define them and they're not just overly cumbersome. If your audience already knows what the jargon means, go ahead and use it, and you may not even need to define it in that case. If you're talking about how something is done or a process, be prepared to show diagrams or models. Sometimes we can get away with a descriptive analogy or comparison, but a lot of times, especially with technical things, you want to use technical diagrams or models. If you're talking about a concept and you're redefining that concept for your audience, where you're presenting information that contradicts commonly accepted ways of thinking, make sure you give extra credibility to your presentation. So extra details that validate the new information. Make sure your sources are credible so that your audience has something to believe in aside from just taking your word for it. Informative speeches can cover a variety of things. It could be about objects or phenomena. It could be about people, events, processes, complex concepts, or issues. Issues you have to be careful of because if something is an issue, by its very definition, that means it has at least two clearly defined, most likely opposing viewpoints. So if you're going to talk about an issue in an informative speech, you have to remain objective and not take sides. So typically I recommend to my students, at least for my class, if you're going to talk about an issue, talk about an issue from the past that has already been resolved. What were the two sides? What did they stand for? How did it turn out? Don't critique whether you agree with how it turned out. But in this way, you can avoid any of the persuasive elements of issues. One type of speech that many people have given, or maybe you've written a paper like this, but we have the how-to speech, also known as a demonstrative speech, where you demonstrate how something is used. So when giving a how-to speech, be prepared to use objects, models, or diagrams to demonstrate the process. If you're going to tell somebody how to do something, you might as well, be prepared to show them how to. When you're doing these types of speeches, you want to pick a topic that's unusual or unique, something that you haven't seen before, because if you've seen it before, chances are your audience has as well. And so you want to make it easy for your audience to watch and not something that they've seen time and again. You want to make it engaging. When it comes to organizing a speech, we have what are called organizational patterns. You want to choose the organizational pattern that best fits the type of information you're delivering, and we'll get into that here in a moment. Once you choose that organizational pattern, make sure that your main points appropriately fit that pattern. And the reason for it is that it helps the audience understand the message more clearly and helps it make sense to them in the long run, not just from moment to moment, but overall it helps the information sink in. The first type of arrangement is what's called a topical pattern of arrangement. A topical pattern of arrangement means that you can manipulate the points into whatever order you want to. It doesn't matter what order they come. So it's just to whatever suits your needs or whatever impact you want to make. If you want to hit your audience with the most information with the first point and then get a little more simple, you can do that. If you want to build up to the most complex parts, you can do that. The points or the evidence is logically linked. It all makes sense together, but it doesn't have a particular order that it has to follow. A speech with a chronological pattern of arrangement talks about something that has happened over time through a timeline. So your main points will be arranged in the form of a timeline. So you'll start at the beginning of that timeline and you'll work your way forward through time. So if you were giving a speech about a person, you would probably start at the beginning of their life or their career or what have you, and you would move forward through their career. You likely wouldn't start right in the middle of their career, go back to the beginning, then move to the end. That wouldn't make much sense. Instead, you would follow that timeline. It is possible to deliver a reverse chronological order speech, though the reasons for doing that are few and far between. Most of the time, we just move forward through time. The next pattern is called a spatial pattern of arrangement. A spatial pattern could convey an idea about a place. This is one way to use it, but it's really about physical relation and physical arrangement. So you're talking about something that your audience could go out and put their hands on or walk through. So you maybe are talking about a place and showing how the different rooms in this house all connect to each other or something along those lines. You could also use it to describe a piece of machinery and how the different parts fit together and how they function. Here, your points are literally linked. They literally touch each other. Then you have a cause and effect pattern. A cause and effect, this is also known as a causal pattern of arrangement. Your speech will be about something that happened and then what the result was. So something happened and then something results. Your points will be arranged so that they cover the causes and effects separately. Sometimes you have multiple causes for a single effect. Sometimes you have multiple effects from a single cause. So it's not necessarily only a two-point speech just because there's only two words there. Next, we have the problem-solution pattern of arrangement. This is one that you need to be careful about using because, like we talked about earlier, sometimes we have a tendency to become persuasive when we intend to become informative. Problem-solution patterns are typically used to talk about issues. So going back to that very brief discussion, remember to talk about issues or problems and solutions from the past, things that have already been resolved. So you'll talk about the problem with all of its details, and then you'll move and you'll talk about the solution in all of its details. But don't offer your opinions, just state the facts of how things turned out. The last pattern here is a circular pattern of arrangement, and to be honest, I've never seen it used effectively. It's just one more I like to introduce because it is an option. This is where you start in one place with your ideas, and then you work your way around in a circle all the way back to your original idea. So all of your evidence, your sources, are going to link to each other and work their way around in a circle. The reason I haven't seen this done effectively is there's something called a logical fallacy. A fallacy of reasoning is called circular reasoning. And it mandates that you have to believe one part of the argument to believe any of it. There's not enough outside evidence to support itself. And a lot of times when people try to use a circular pattern, that's what they end up doing. They make it so that the audience has to walk into the speech already believing the points. There's not enough support from the outside. So be careful with that one. Here on this last slide, we just have a quick list of options for the different speech topics, if you will. If you're talking about objects, you might use a spatial pattern or a topical pattern. If you're talking about people, you choose topical or chronological. And I'm not going to read all of these to you. You can read them yourself. But of course, if you ever have a question about what pattern should I be using, you can always ask me. But you should know what pattern you're using, because if you don't know what pattern you're using, I can guarantee your audience isn't going to be able to figure it out. But you should know what pattern you're using, and this will help you organize your speech as you research and get ready, and it will help you stay organized as well.